Part 2. The Grayling Fae. Chapter 19. Facing the Fairy King. Maisie. Bedecked in all my new, magically created finery, I followed the king's servant into the throne room, trying not to tremble. Before leaving my room, I'd been schooled by an eager pixie on how to curtsy and address the king. But at the sight of the throne room, and its magnificence and grandeur, all the pixie's training fled my mind. Light played in all manner and varied ways around the room, dancing off surfaces and bouncing off mirrors like an active child. It sparkled in midair with no apparent source. It dazzled and blinded the senses, evading physics and logical reason. A long red carpet threaded with gold glowed and made a path from the door to the throne. I stepped onto it carefully, trying not to trip on its thick plush weave. It was soft beneath my slippers, the most magnificent thing I'd ever had underfoot. But it was the least of the room. Overhead, crystal and gold chandeliers glistened. Sunlight poured through the floor to ceiling, diamond-arched windows on either side of the throne. In the middle of it all, highlighted by the light, if that were possible, sat the king on his throne on a raised platform. He was surrounded, encased by a rainbow of light that shimmered and moved around him, green the color of deep emeralds and thick moss, ruby red as dark as blood and as vibrant as a smoky sunset, blue like the dark night of sapphire. The light surrounding him was so radiant and brilliant, I could only make out the outline of his regal figure in the midst of it, glowing brighter than the rest. I couldn't distinguish his face or features, only that his coat sparkled with diamonds and jewels, and the buckles of his shoes were polished platinum. My instinct was to shade my eyes from the blinding brilliance. I remembered my training, just in time to stop myself from committing that nearly unforgivable faux pas. On each side of the throne sat a smaller throne, each on a step lower than the king's platform. They were beautiful, burnished gold encrusted with jewels, but they paled in comparison to the king's throne. Bridger sat on the throne at the king's right hand, surrounded by radiant yellow light. Gage sat on his left in a pool of blue, a sapphire gleaming in the signet ring on his right hand, both of them eclipsed by the king's light. Pixies darted in the air around them. Fae soldiers stood guard on either side. 2 griffins rested at their feet, their eyes terrifying as they watched me approach. I'd never seen a griffin before. They didn't exist in the human realm, except maybe in the Douve, where legends of them ran wild. I was glad I hadn't encountered them before. Even seeing them now, under the control of the Fae King, made my knees weak with fear. The servant I was following stopped abruptly in front of the throne and bowed low. "Your Majesty." The king motioned for him to rise. The servant drew me forward. "Maisie Jane Rose, Your Highness." I bowed low, trembling, with my pink and black light skirts shimmering around me. "Maisie Jane Rose, you may rise." The king's voice was deep and powerful, like water thundering over falls, yet as light and mysterious as the rainbow shimmers in the drops of the cascading waters. One rose, trying to maintain my composure, and steeled myself to look at him directly, past the beasts at his feet who watched me benignly. At the moment, as one rose, the light around him grew softer, and the rainbow of colors dimmed, allowing me to see him fully. He looked almost human. He was the most handsome, most magnificent male I had ever seen. I had expected him to be old and fatherly, but he was young and powerful, and perfect in every way. With eyes that were deep and so searching they seemed capable of pulling the truth from any creature, human or not. I hadn't thought a more beautiful creature was possible, given the ones I'd already seen. But here he was before my eyes. "You dare steal into my kingdom because of the debt I owe you." His eyes bore into me. "I didn't steal in. I was abducted and brought here by him." I pointed at Bridger. "And him." I pointed at Gage. "I begged only to be taken safely out of the Douve. I pleaded not to be taken here specifically." I met the king's gaze directly, though it took an act of will. He remained calm and unmoved. His expression masked, giving nothing away. "They had no choice but to bring you here, given the great service you rendered me." "But what did I do?" I'd been thinking and pondering on what I could possibly have done to put the Fairy King in my debt, since his soldiers had saved me in the Douve. And come up empty. What life had I saved? What did you do? He roared, nearly coming off his throne. His beautiful face contorted into astonished, righteous anger. Are you insulting me by claiming that saving my son and heir should be accounted as nothing? The air vibrated with his power, and waves of anger like breakers pounding the shore. The griffins at his feet stirred and stared at me with predator eyes. But though they were on alert and ready, they were well trained enough not to attack me without their master's explicit command. Despite my resolve to appear fearless, I trembled. My knees felt weak, barely strong enough to hold me. I beg your pardon, Your Majesty. Had I saved a prince, I would of course understand the insult I've caused you. But I've never saved anyone. His eyes flashed. A bolt of lightning crashed behind him, a manifestation of his displeasure. I automatically took a step back, still trembling. I seemed to be the only one in the room frightened by the outburst. The two Fays sitting on either side of him seemed to take it in stride, almost amused. Gage played with his signet ring as he addressed the king. Your Highness, if I may speak for the young woman? The king nodded, almost too solemnly. Permission granted to Gage Skyamane, Duke of Azuria, to speak on behalf of our guest. Thank you, Highness. As Gage's gaze swept past me, I would have sworn he winked at me. I felt a measure of calm. Gage turned to the king. The young woman has been raised among humans in the outer lands of their kingdom, outside even human society and their royal court. She's obviously intelligent and schooled in many subjects. But she's clearly unfamiliar with politics and her own royal court, as proven when she didn't recognize Prince Rylan in the Douve. We can't expect her to be familiar with or understand ours. I gasped. Prince Rylan. That couldn't be. He'd been called back to royal circle by the king. Gage indicated me with a sweep of his arm. Look at her now. She's astonished. She can't believe she met the prince of her realm in the Douve. I believe that until now, she was genuinely unaware of just who she rescued. I give shock full credit. It totally addled her mind. She's partially human, after all. They're notoriously weak and fragile. Now wait a minute, I spoke without thinking. My mind was still reeling. How could Prince Rylan be the Fairy King's son? Could the old rumors about the late queen be true? Even in the human realm, interrupting a duke could get one sent to the dungeons or put in the pillory or stocks. I shuddered to think what would happen here. But Gage ignored me with good nature. Her encounter with the feared Dorka surely stunned her senseless. She didn't identify Bridger and me as ever having seen us before when we rescued her last night. Not an inkling of recognition in her voice. Not a flicker in her eyes. Nor does she show any signs of it now. His gaze flicked to me and back to the king. Not that I'm vain, mind you, but the ladies generally don't forget me. He laughed warmly. Good teasing humor lit his eyes. Suddenly, it hit me. Wait. You two were the Fae in the forest who kidnapped that young man. Young man. The king's voice roared and crackled like both fire and ice. You mean my Fae son? Bridger winked at me slyly and wagged his finger at me, warning me off. Can a father and king kidnap his son and subject? The king's eyes blazed. I took that as a rhetorical question. Evidently, I'd stumbled into a sore spot with the king. But his son had a human mother, at the least. The entire situation was bizarre and confusing to me. Prince Rylan was also a Fae prince? How could that even be? The Fairy King looked no older than me, certainly not old enough to have a son approximately my age. Nor did the Duke and Bridger look any older than I was. Everyone in court was young. There wasn't a gray head or hair anywhere. My head was spinning. I forced myself to concentrate on the immediate concern. I beg your pardon, Your Highness. I bowed my head and dropped into a low curtsy. I am indeed ignorant of the personages in your court, and mine. Even still, I didn't rescue the prince. Your two loyal warriors at your side did. I had no choice but to ignore the kidnapping aspect. Clearly the handsome young man, the prince, whoever he really was, hadn't gone willingly. The Duke of Azuria and the Duke of Citrones brought the prince home to me, that's true. But did you or did you not call my son to you by picking the rose? Yes, your majesty. I did pick the rose. There was no denying that. But I'd been completely ignorant that picking the rose would call a prince, fae or human. Maybe best not to admit to that ignorance right at this moment. But the young man had seemed so human in the darkness of the Douve. The Fairy King's manner calmed. Exactly so. Which called my son away from the location where he was being attacked by the feared Dorka, startling the Darkling, and giving the prince time to break away from him, and the Duke's time to track him and rescue him. You may rise. I stood again shakily, not daring to contradict him. This was all news to me and hard to digest. Morel had never mentioned that picking the rose would call a prince to me. But then she'd lied about many things. Your Majesty, may I say that we should call the dead even? Your son saved me too by attacking the Darkling. That's not the way I hear it. You attacked the Darkling with an iron dagger while my son was struck down. The debt is clearly mine. But I appreciate your regard for the prince. And your humility. I curtsied again. You've put me in a dangerous position, Miss Rose. The human king, Kylan IV, could easily construe the theft of his selectress as an act of war. And not his brother? I thought. And if Rylan is truly the Fairy King's son, isn't Kylan his son too? But I don't want to be his selectress. I never did. Lord Noblet took me by force. He has some nefarious plan of his own. But speaking of my betrothal, I want the ring back. So you can kill yourself? The light left his voice. He stared at me. I bowed my head. As I thought. The king's eyes sparkled like fire. That ring is full of dark magic. Giselian's brand of dark enchantment is all over it. Is that why you want the ring? So you can use it against me? Is that why you brought it here? His fairy logic was confusing me. Hadn't his men kidnapped me? As he drummed his fingers on the arm of his throne, I noticed for the first time the distinctive sunburst insignia of his ring. Who are you really, Maisie Jane Rose? What conundrums are you playing with? I could have asked the same questions of him. He took a deep breath. The Unseelie court won't take kindly to me taking one of theirs into my kingdom, even to protect. I stared at him openly, trying not to let my mouth fall open. What was he talking about now? Are you a spy for the Unseelie queen, then? Mute at being caught? His eyes sparkled, but the emotion they danced with was impossible to determine. I don't know what you mean. I stuttered, still dazed by everything I was hearing. What do I have to do with the Darklings? I was genuine in my confusion. He tilted his head as he studied me. His gaze fell on the streaks of black light woven into my otherwise light pink dress. You have veins of dark light in you. Even Lynette could see it. She's tried to disguise it as beauty, to temper it in my sight. She must like you to try so hard on your behalf. I was pleased that Lynette had liked me enough to try to help. But I couldn't let her take the blame for my flaws. However, I drew a blank. I couldn't think. Then, out of the blue, I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head. I repeated what she'd so often told me. I'm human, I said. The beautiful thing about humans is that while we have the capacity for doing great evil, we can also do great good. We can be selfless and sacrificing. And it's all the more beautiful because we've chosen the good over the temptation of the dark. Very nice, he said flatly. But the dark in you isn't ordinary human darkness. It's fae. He leaned forward suddenly. I went cold. I couldn't think. All my mind could do was scream that I couldn't be fae. It was impossible. So impossible that I couldn't even grasp the idea, let alone respond to such absurdity. Stunned into silence, are you? Raiden's gaze was penetrating. Answer me this, Maisie rose. If you aren't a darkling, then why have you had a prince of the royal house of the Unimaginable watching over you since birth? My heart stopped. The coldness became ice in my veins. Why did he keep insisting? Me? Faye? A darkling? No. That's impossible. As unthinkable as Ree being a prince. Raiden stared me down, holding his anger in check. I just called the king a liar. In the mortal realm, that would be a capital offense. But so far, I still had my head. And I had no doubt he could sever it with a wave of his hand if he wanted to. I'm human. I tapped my chest. Just human. Simply human. Unimaginable are house fae to humans in the south. Why shouldn't I, a human woman, have one? I managed to get the words out, but I wasn't sure how. They felt like sand in my mouth. A dread fear filled me. What if Raiden was right? We'd always wondered why Ree was with us. We assumed we were just unlucky, or Ree was defective. I'd never imagined something so terrible. In the south but not in the north, the Fairy King said evenly. Unlike their cousins in the Seelie court, they don't like the cold. They torment, not help humans like the northern brownies related to us do. And the royal house never stoops to either serving or tormenting ordinary humans. But you've had the protection of a prince. I didn't know. But that doesn't make me a darkling. I was still trying to wrap my head around being Fae and darkling at that, and Ree being a prince. In your world, you're the only one who can see him, correct? Yes, but you escaped the Douve untouched, something beyond the grasp of a mere human. Something that comes easily to a darkling. I gasped. And if I'm not mistaken, a witch sent you into the forest, singled you out even when she could have gotten a fat purse by sending another after the rose. It's because she knew I was desperate. Or because she knew only a darkling could pluck the rose. No. I shook my head. No. You wounded the fear, Dorka, and yet he let you live. He held out his hand to me. Let me see this beautiful hand of yours. I had been hiding it in the folds of my skirt. I knew better than to touch the king, but I stretched my hand out for him to see. The case King Raiden was making against me was making my head spin. I hated the darklings. I couldn't be one. His eyes narrowed. Skilled magic. Yes, but would dark magic make the darkness beautiful? I asked, breathless and fighting his logic. That's one of its many talents. Beauty is the way darkness seduces. He sat back in his throne. I tucked my hand back into my skirts, trembling. I'm not a darkling. Yet you asked for beauty. When you could have asked me for anything, so deep is the debt I owe you. What else would I ask you for? Beauty will seduce the king, and give me the power to save my sister. Beauty is the only thing King Kylan values. It's the one thing that will make him fall in love with me, rather than kill me. And then maybe he'll help my sister. The Fairy King laughed. Naive girl. He values power more than all the gold in your world. More almost than his life. You might have asked for that. Or you might have asked for wisdom, he said levelly. A wise woman would have found another way to get what she wants. Would have been able to think her way out of any situation. Yes, you're right. Of course. But I was scared. I wasn't thinking clearly. All my elegant arguments deserted me. Give me wisdom and send me back to the human world. I must get back to my sister. She's in danger. She's being pampered and treated like an honored guest in Lord Fanger's castle. She's in no immediate danger. No. I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe it. I don't believe you. If she's there, it's a trick. It may be a ruse, a trap, or a trick, he said. Humans are unreliable by nature. But nevertheless, my spies report that she's in no immediate danger. However, If I send you back now, I will be sending you to your death, which would break my oath to save a life for you, any life you request in repayment for saving my sons. You asked for your life. That's the bargain. I can't return you to your realm now. Too many people are plotting to kill you in too many clever ways. Too many want you dead for more reasons than you know, some of them personal, others purely for power and their own gain. Where power is concerned, they won't be dissuaded by pretty pleading or clever bargains. You're too naive and inexperienced to survive even their most basic and amateur attempts. Sending you back now would be like sending a lamb to the slaughter. I won't have your blood on my hands. He brushed his hands together like washing them clean. You'll stay here, under my protection, until I'm convinced you're prepared enough to have at least a fighting chance of survival. Until the circumstances are right for your return. I tried to maintain my composure beneath his piercing gaze and not blink before his radiance. I can't send you home now, but I can make you beautiful, he said. If you'll have it, I offer you the only kind of true beauty worth having. The kind that inspires loyalty, drives devotion, moves people to love. If you're willing to work for it. I didn't hesitate. Yes. Yes. I'll work as if my life depends on it. But I'm not a darkling. Not fully, he said calmly. You're a mixed breed. But to be truly beautiful, you're going to have to banish the darkness in you, totally eradicate it. He paused as he ran his gaze over me critically. I tried hard not to squirm. You didn't catch it a moment ago, when I mentioned that you could have asked me for power. You didn't realize, which worries me, that beauty is power. For more than saving your sister. If you had, you might have corrected me and identified that you had asked for almost limitless power. That you had wisdom enough to ask for 2 gifts from me in one. You rightly identified that beauty can be used to seduce. A face can be so beautiful that it launches 1,000 ships and starts a great war. It can drive a man mad and entice him to wreck his ships on the rocks because of the siren's call of a beautiful voice. Beauty drives desire. It fuels lust. It can be used to get what the bearer desires. Because of that, its power and the way to use it must be understood. I'm required to give you beauty, as you ask. What kind remains to be seen. But I won't unleash you on the world a moment before you fully understand the new capacity and strength you possess, and are compassionate enough to use it wisely. He turned and whispered something to Bridger. Bridger nodded. The Fairy King's gaze returned to me. We'll have to start training you immediately. Let's hope you have enough Seelie and human light in you to work with. That you're strong enough to overcome your darkling ancestry and blood. He lowered his voice. And let's hope Giselian doesn't get wind of what we're up to and come after you.